Syed Haider with the Dr. Haider Show, and we're back again for the second show of the day with Matt and Joy Thayer. I'm also really excited about this one. They're both award-winning filmmakers, and they are speaking out about systemic medical fraud in America. They're filming an important documentary series on pandemic-related topics like medical tyranny, injection injuries, mandates, and a whole lot more. The first episode is already out. It's at reawakeningseries.com. So without further ado, let me welcome Matt and Joy Thayer. Hey.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having us. We're so excited.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
me
great.
too. So just tell us all a little bit about your background. I mean, like, what were you guys doing before the pandemic hit, and then how did things change? How did things change in the last few years?
Yeah. So I
Go a little bit.
mean, we've owned a corporate and commercial company. Our company is called Sparrow Pictures for many, many years, and we've done thousands of corporate and commercial projects for companies like HP, Verizon, UC Davis Medical Center, all kinds of stuff. But some of the things that people don't always know about us is I had a severely disabled son for almost 21 years, and Matt came into his life when he was a young man and helped raise him, and he ended up passing away a few years ago. So we've actually been dealing with medical tyranny his entire life. When he was born, the doctors, when they cleaned him up, they took him away. They didn't come back in the room with him, and they said there's something wrong. We've tested him for drugs, we've tested this, we've tested that, and we don't think he's going to make it through the night. And we can actually leave him in the other room and just let him pass away. And so that was my first experience going, wait, that's not right. And so found out he had a rare genetic syndrome, and through that process, I ended up learning a lot about vitamins and herbs and alternative medicine and vaccines. And so he was never vaccinated because he had failure to thrive. And they said he could be easily vaccine injured and that he could pass away. So once the pandemic hit, we had already worked on a couple of things. So worked on a film called The Trump I Know during the pandemic, during 2020. And we got to film President Trump in the White House and 31 women in the business, the family, and the campaign. And then Clay Clark met us and said, hey, I've got this documentary idea. We would love to, have you guys on board. So we've interviewed 82 different people. And then the second episode, which is getting ready to come out in July, is on medical tyranny. And it talks about not just COVID, because COVID was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, but exposes some of the stuff, like you're saying, with vaccines. We got to interview Robert Kennedy Jr., and he talks about, some of the VAERS numbers and all that kind of stuff. But also, we talk about some of the stuff that's going on with cancer and AIDS and different things.
And how protocols kill people. And, this has been happening for probably a lot longer than most of us would like to realize, honestly. And that tyranny really is tyranny is tyranny.
Yeah.
Tyranny has taken on many shapes over the years and has put on several frocks. And this one just happens to be walking around in a white lab coat with a stethoscope, but it's still just tyranny. Mm-hmm. And so we need to remember our history and remember how we fought that tyranny in the past, mm-hmm. how we fought tyranny in the past, and how we need to, fight it again with the same tools that our founders have given us. And the same thing will win again.
Yeah, I think people don't realize or remember that physicians are often roped into, government tyranny. I mean, it happened happened with the Jews in Germany in World War II. The physicians were also tyrannizing the population, right? So, I mean, this has happened. It's also happened in our own history, right? So, with slavery, we have a really a black eye on the medical profession. Even just like 100 years ago in the United States, there were a whole lot of terrible things going on that were being done with black people, experiments, right? And
Right.
now we're experimenting on the whole world. And so people don't really understand that. What's kind of the roadmap for your documentary? You said that the second episode is focusing on medical tyranny. What about the first one and the rest of them? Do you have like kind of a roadmap of what you're going to be focusing on?
Well, so as the director, I like to I like to kind of tackle big ideas, and with political documentaries, they can kind of get a little bit myopic, where it's like, well, it's just about this thing. And the way that my mind works is that I see connections in all of these different ways and all of these different places, and so when it comes to this documentary, really, it's like, what are we reawakening to? We're reawakening to this idea of what is freedom and liberty truly look like. How is that married to personal responsibility? It's up to us to maintain our awareness of the world around us, and not to go to sleep again. And so, so to me, it really was about bringing in that historical perspective. So like in the first episode, we talk about religious tyranny. We talk about how, in the past, religious tyranny has been used, and then also how they've kind of warped the whole idea of separation of church and state, and to get morals out of the conversation when it comes to government. But where did some of these ideas that formed America come from? And they really did come from the Judeo-Christian past, and some of the ways that the Jews ended up codifying through the help of divine inspiration, codifying these principles that our founders then took and said, hey, well, private property rights, and everybody can read, and everybody's armed, and all of this stuff that happened right after the Jewish Exodus. That was all very that was all revolutionary at that time. That was something that nobody had ever done before on the face of the planet. And so this was something that our founders looked back on, were inspired by, and then added to it, with the other republics from the Greek and the Romans and everything else, but then really kind of gave us this really amazing special thing when it came to America. And
that's why I think we started with religious tyranny, right? Because we have to protect everybody's religious beliefs,
right?
We happen to be Christians, but if religious beliefs go to the wayside, then you have people telling you what you can believe, and then we're starting to go into communism. So we were exposing, the religious tyranny, and then the next episode was on medical tyranny,
right? And how like we have to have that foundation and understanding.
Just before we jump to the medical tyranny, I think a lot of people don't realize that communism often goes hand in hand with religious tyranny, right? Where they actually try to get rid of religion, and people oftentimes think that it's only it's an economic change, and the way we handle the economics of government.
Yeah, absolutely, because it violates the conscience, right? Which is what our founders always talked about, was that you should be able to believe according to your own conscience, to the way that you feel led to believe, and that's something that's very individual. And it's communism. What's interesting is that it celebrates the group over the individual, and whenever you do that, it always leads to tyranny. But when you celebrate the individual over the group, it always leads to liberty. And that was, the great experiment that America was that we were going to empower the individual up to the point, basically it's like, beyond anything that had ever been done before. And it's led to the most free and liberty-driven society, and led to very lots of innovations and all of these things. And tyranny. What's interesting about tyranny is just like, it's like a garden, right? It's like a garden that's not tended will just be overgrown. So it's a default system in government is tyrannical monarchies and dictatorial systems are the default system of human government. Well, that doesn't mean that it's the best system of human government. It's just the default. And it's like when you just allow that plot of land to just go and not tend it, well, it just gets overgrown with weeds, because that's just what nature does. But human beings are supposed to bring in some sort of an order and a structure, and by tending that garden, it begins to produce and flourish and all of these things. Well, that's what liberty is. Liberty isn't just a non-structured society. It actually, we do have to have personal responsibility, and we have to have consequences for actions and things like that. But it's all about celebrating that individual over the collective.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is a misreading of history, but one of the founding fathers didn't he say that he expected that we would have to have a revolution every few decades?
I think that was Thomas Jefferson. I think is is said to have said that. I have to go back and look at that, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, we're more than 200 years on now, and so where do you see that we may have gone wrong with this grand experiment?
I think that's
Wow.
that's a good question, and it's a loaded question in a sense because there's so many answers to that. But I think that what Matt was saying is part of it is we've just kind of gotten lazy as humans, and we were talking about this the other day. Is they kind of got us on convenience. If you do this and we'll do that and we'll do this. And right now, if the government just takes care of everything, you're not actually responsible for anything. And so we've just allowed that to kind of creep in. And then, it's only a small portion of people that actually need to vote. And most people go, I don't know what to vote on. I don't know who to vote for. It's just too much for me. And they don't even go in and actually do it. So I think we actually need people to care about their school board, to care about these elected officials. They need to know what the sheriff does. They need to know what their AG does, and not just if they are voting, not just check a box, R or D. Look into what they have done in the past and who they are and how their voting records are, and getting involved, and then just being more involved in society as a whole. For people that just put their kids into school, they don't know what their children are being taught. And now that they're finding out some of the stuff that's happening in schools, they're upset. But we've just kind of been lazy and just, take care of my kids. I've got work to do. Mm-hmm. I've got other things, and I don't want to think about it. And we can't do that. We actually need to be doing the things and knowing what's going on and being more aware.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has worried me lately is that when we went from one parent working to two parents working, and then two parents working 2 jobs each to 2.5 jobs, people are becoming more and more impoverished, and they have less and less time to think about anything else, right? They come home and they're I just want to flop down on the couch and eat my nuked food in the microwave and watch some TV and then go to sleep and go back to work again in the morning. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people feel like they just don't have the time, and the reason is that they're getting further and further impoverished with each passing decade.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer. I'm going to speak to that. I think it's interesting, but I do. We get criticized sometimes. We don't bring up where the website is and where they can watch the film enough, and so we're going to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, we've got it on the screen. It's reawakeningseries.com.
Yeah, and it's free. You can watch it for free, and you watch the first episode for free. All you have to do is just go in there and just put in your email address and a name, and you can have access to watch it for free. You can watch it tonight. Anyway, I think it's interesting because there's so many things that kind of really dovetail together, right? They're all. I think we've been a part of something that's been pretty devious for probably well over a century. That has gotten us to accept, like what you were saying, like here's, we just got to have 2 jobs or 3 jobs or whatever, and we're just trying to make ends meet, and they've got us in debt. And really, it has a lot to do with monetary policy. It has a lot to do with the Federal Reserve. It has a lot to do with the fiat currency and the fact that we don't have any kind of sound money anymore. Really, what that does to society is pretty crazy. I was just reading a book recently, and the guy was talking about sound money, and he just did it really makes a lot of sense. It's the reason why we don't see, amazing cathedrals anymore, or amazing symphonies anymore. It's because there's such a high time preference for people.
Is that Seyfuddin? It sounds like Seyfuddin. Seyfuddin Ammous, is that his book?
Yeah. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was him. Yeah. Yep. And I think it was a brilliant book, and it's just it has that
the fiat standard or
it's a Bitcoin standard
and the Bitcoin standard.
It had it made a lot of sense of why we don't see high art anymore, and why we've seen the degradation of family and everything else is, like you said, because we're just so caught up in this hamster wheel of survival. And that's really been done. And so we just don't have time to think about anything else. But then they've also convinced us that it is a hierarchical system between like the federal government and then the state government and then the local government, when it's actually the opposite. The local government's always supposed to be the most powerful, and then the state and the federal government's just supposed to kind of do a few things that, you know, we know that we need to do, like defend the country or, you know, handle trade or international relations, but, you know, not be this overarching, you know, in every tendril of society kind of, you know, beast that it's become.
Yeah, it's been flipped on its head a little bit. The states used to have a lot more power.
Yep, and that's been time where they've convinced people of that, and you know, it makes a lot of sense, you know, because, you know, like I said, the default system of human government, you know, even in families, you know what I mean, there's, you know, parents and then kids and, you know, and all this other stuff, and then, you know, in companies there's CEOs and, you know, and so it's like a bit of a pyramidal structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons people feel like the federal government is the top dog is because we pay them so much in our taxes. I mean, they got to be the top dog, right? If they're taking, you know, 20-30% of my paycheck.
Right. Exactly. So
that also goes back to the Federal Reserve and the IRS and when they were created and why they were created and who is ruling those, and, you know, how the IRS isn't even a part of the government system. And so there's just a lot of information that they have not made aware to the public.
Well, they use words really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been going on much longer than most people realize. I mean, you know, the Federal Reserve is from more than 200 years ago now, and they called it federal for a reason, to make people think that it was part of the federal government when it was not.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, so I think it's just been, but what's really encouraging is that for somebody like myself, who, you know, my dad, well, Joy's the same way. Both of our parents were talking about like one world government and, you know, gold and silver and funny money, you know, for like ever since I could remember.
Right.
And so, you know, we've been
thought
part
our
of.
Parents were a little crazy.
Yeah, we were, you know, at some points thought our parents were a little nuts. But the thing is, what's interesting, as somebody who has been, you know, a part of these conversations for a long period of time, states' rights and state sovereignty, and, you know, what states should be taken care of versus the federal government, those kinds of conversations. It's really encouraging, actually, to see this many people being, you know, waking up and realizing like, oh, wow, like this isn't crazy. Like there is people that are taking advantage of us, and we need to be, you know, aware of some of these things and having these kind of conversations. I mean, we're at these Reawakened America tours with Clay Clark and General Flynn, and every single tour, there's people that come up to our table and they're just like, their eyes are wide eyed, and they're just like, when did you become awake? I just became awake because of January 6th. And oh my gosh, you know what I mean? And they're just like, and, you know, the world's on fire. My hair's on fire. Everybody's on fire. You're on fire, you know? And it's like, and I'm standing there going, actually, the fact that you're standing here talking to me is really encouraging, because I think we're going to get through this, because I've been a part of these conversations for 30 years. And it was something that we couldn't talk about in mixed company not that long ago. And now all of a sudden we're having way more open conversations.
And doctors are like yourself are speaking up, you know, and not allowing their voices to be silenced. And I think that's incredibly important, is you have these courageous people that are putting their life and their reputations on the line to speak the truth, you know?
Yeah, like you said, you know, you had kind of been aware of the medical tyranny in our system for a long time, and a lot of people who've had vaccine injured children were already aware that there was something rotten, right, in Denmark. But now a lot of people have woken up to the fact that, you know, this whole medical system is rotten to the core. I mean, you know, the FDA is in bed with pharmaceutical companies, and people are rightfully, you know, going back and reassessing, you know, all the things they've been taught and told, you know, about other vaccines as well. And so I think, like, you know, like Kennedy, you know, has been shining a light on that for decades now. People need to probably read his book and look at his website. And, you know, Children's Health Defense, it's a great website to get some understanding. I mean, certainly these are the worst quote unquote vaccines that we've ever created. But there's a reason why it's been, you know, since the late 80s that the vaccine companies have had this, you know, waiver of, you know, responsibility from the federal government. I mean, it didn't just happen with COVID vaccines. That waiver has been in place since, I think, the late 80s, right?
Right.
Yeah. And also I think that's the other thing right now is the informed consent. Like people need to understand that they have to have informed consent, and being forced to do something without being informed isn't okay. And so even when you would get a vaccine, the doctors would just give a vaccine, but you were actually allowed to see what was in those. So you could see if there was formaldehyde, if there was aluminum, or there was these toxins. They didn't just voluntarily give you that information, but if you asked for it, then you could get it. Well, when these shots first came out, the little pamphlet inside was blank. This was
I couldn't believe that when I saw that. Yeah, totally blank.
You know, and so the people that have been told you have to take this or you'll lose your job have the right to fight back because they didn't have the information when they took the shot. So they weren't informed on what they were injecting their bodies with. And there wasn't any studies that said, you know, this could cause all of these various things that we're seeing now. You know, I just heard today, I think the CDC, you know, shared some of the stuff that's been going on, and you know, people are now 2 years in, and how many vaccines have they gotten? You know, how many boosters have they?
Some people are on their fifth shot. I mean,
that blows my mind. That blows my mind.
So you tell me a bit about some of the people you've talked to in the second installment of the series. Like, have you talked to people who are fighting back? Are they making any headway with this against the government, against, you know, the mandates, against private employers?
Yeah. So on the second episode, so because we're not podcasters and we're documentarians, we're giving context to what's been happening for a long period of time.
It takes a little bit longer to make a documentary than it does to make a podcast.
And there's so much information coming out daily. But we have actually interviewed a lot of the different podcasters. So we've interviewed Seth Holhouse and Mel K on propaganda. And I've had personal experience at Sundance on how they're talking about how they're doing propaganda openly. Obama signed something into law when it was the Smith-Mundt Act revised. You can look it up, and how they can use propaganda against the American people. So they're using that to tell a narrative that these vaccines are safe and effective. So then what you can do is you can listen to these different doctors. So we have done Dr. Simone Gold, Dr. Stella Emanuel, Dr. Rob Marsh,
Dr.
Artis, Dr. Naputi. A lot of these doctors. Tom Renz is a lawyer. So he's talking about who he's going after, how he's going after it. A bunch of his court cases are just being held up indefinitely. So now he's going after them having to actually give him a court date so that they can fight about, have his day in court and fight over. I mean, if he's wrong, prove him wrong. And so, it's going to be a pretty intense documentary.
Yeah. And the way that we're structuring it is, it's not just it's like, even though we started off with Clay Clark and General Flynn, it's like we're branching off into a lot of these, what we consider modern day heroes. And if anybody's ever seen the documentary, I know that we've all canceled Netflix, and if you haven't, you should. But there's a documentary, if you have seen it, there's it's The Last Stand. The Last Dance, which was a really great documentary series on the Bulls, and I was a big Bulls fan growing up. And so the way that we structured our documentary is very similar to that, where it's like each one of those episodes kind of focus on a different player. And so we're kind of doing that with this one, where the first one was really, about, Clay. Clay's a very interesting character, very colorful, very fun. But then the next one, we're going to be, kind of diving into Tom Renz a little bit more. And then we're finding these characters that kind of like go with each one of the topics that we're talking about in some sort of an interesting way. Because we're really big. While we want to be presenting good information, and we're going to do our due diligence and make sure that everything that we're presenting is as true as we know it, we are also entertainers, right? And we understand that the reason why a lot of people tune into something is because it's entertaining, and we want to be telling stories and having fun, and and be engaging as well. And so we're trying to structure things that way and find the most interesting characters that we can kind of follow through the narrative, and then meet the other little sub characters as we go.
Because he was a backwoods lawyer. Nobody knew who he was. And when all this started happening, he just came out and he was just, fighting the good fight. And so that's been,
and that's exactly the point. The point is that it's about finding people who are inspiring, enough in their own way, so that when people watch this, they go, oh, I could do something, right? I don't want to just present here are these amazing people and they're out there saving the country, and you just get to kind of sit there in your armchair and watch. It's more about putting people out in front of people that go well, shoot, if Tom Renz can stand up, he's just this, small town lawyer and kind of goofy, and but he's a bulldog.
Yeah.
And it's well, I can go and do that. I can go and and it's encouraging and it's empowering to people, which is really what it's about, because it's not about these other people being awake. It's about you being awake.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that we do, was we bring hope and we bring joy and we bring life. And so it also empowers people on what can I do? It's not just exposing them to all this information and them being in the fetal position as they just watched a Nicholas Sparks film or something. Is we have actually taken them and said, here's some resources. Whatever you do, if you're a county clerk, or if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a filmmaker, if you're a housewife, how can you actually get involved and, be aware of what's going on in your sphere of influence.
And one of the ways that people can do that is actually, if there's a Reawakened Tour near you, come to the Reawakened Tour and meet people, because one of the great things, it's not just about seeing the speakers and, we're going to be there. And if you want to come and meet us, you can call and get tickets and let them know that you heard about the documentary. That's great. But it's also about meeting the people there in your local area and finding that commonality and building that tribe, and going oh, I you're doing this and I'm doing that. Well, what if we join forces and do this together? And it's about building that camaraderie that you can only really do in that kind of an environment. And it's an amazing tour. I mean, we've been to 11 of them.
Oh my goodness, so many.
12
and as you're scrolling through all these people, we've interviewed a good portion.
We've interviewed a good portion of these people.
Those. And so that's why we're also doing it's episodes. And so after Medical Tyranny, we're talking about election integrity. And so everybody's so excited that 2,000 Mules just came out and all the stuff that's being exposed. Matt is currently working on a project. Can we share any of the details of that one?
Oh, that one's... Yeah, that you'll be hearing about that in a little bit. Yeah,
that one's separate than our documentary
the next couple
series.
Of weeks, I picked up a little side hustle. So,
so that one's also going to be on some of the stuff that's going on with elections, and then our third episode is going to be that third leg of the stool with the 2,000 Mules with this other project and the one we're doing, because there's so many ways that they're trying to commit fraud, and again they're shrouding this in some of the medical tyranny,
and then we're talking about the Great Reset on the fourth
Reset on the fourth one. And again, how do we keep our liberties? And while we are very pro-American, this is about saving America. What happens in America affects every other country. We're talking about slavery, and we have modern day slavery still in Africa. We have modern day slavery over in China.
We have
modern day slavery in America. And so just exposing what's been going on, some of the plans that have been shared out loud, that they're not hiding this anymore. They're getting super arrogant, and we can still do something and keep our liberties and have that revolution. And I think we can have a peaceful revolution, to be honest. I think that we can do something where we are standing up and we get to surprise the world by just whatever our God-given gifts and talents are.
Yeah, one thing that I try to focus on in my interviews is that the people really have the power. They just have to seize it. And it's the only reason that we appear powerless is because we're divided, right? And so the people in charge really want us to focus on these minor differences between us instead of focusing on the commonalities, and especially instead of focusing against our common enemies, right? If we all joined together and focused against our common enemies, the tyranny that affects all of us, governments don't have enough guns or troops or, missiles to really take power away from everyone when they're united against these. It's just a few people at the top, right? I mean, there's not that many of them.
Your example is exactly right. I mean, we saw it happen in Poland in the early 80s, the Solidarity movement, where they just were like, hey, there's only 50,000 of you, and there's, like however many million Poles, good luck running the country without us. And they just stopped, and everybody stopped. And all of a sudden it was like, well, the communists didn't know what to do. They couldn't, like you said, there wasn't enough guns and ammo to take care of everybody.
Yeah.
And so,
So it really is an information war, right? It's really about
absolutely. So that's why we're talking about the propaganda in the medical tyranny piece, because it is such an information war. But one of your comments here says, can you guys discuss the dangers of remdesivir? That will also be in the second episode. Yep. Dr. Artis talks about the protocols, when they were put in place, how they were put in place, how long remdesivir has been used, what it's been used for, how long some of these other
how these protocols are just killing people.
Absolutely.
And it's been, whether it's remdesivir or some of just legit drugs that are just a cocktail that end up kind of creating more problems than the person had when they walked into the hospital. That's been happening for a while.
And you'll be able to track timelines too. So from day 1 to day 3 to day 5 to day 7. So be checking that out, because that's a whole topic on its own. But it will be in the second episode.
Wait, tell me more about the timelines. I didn't catch that.
So
what do you mean by the timelines?
Remdesivir, and so there'll be certain things that will happen day 1. There'll be certain things that'll start happening day 3, and you can track this across the board, where people will go in the hospital. They may or may not even go in with COVID, and they put them on the hospital protocols no matter what. And then all of a sudden, somebody that they found out actually didn't have COVID is dying of these same symptoms as somebody that had COVID, but the only commonality is they were both put on remdesivir. And so we go into some of that on what dates did something happen. So you can, and speaking of, then maybe powered with that information, you find a good lawyer and you go back and you sue the hospital, you sue the doctors, and we go back to the informed consent. And I didn't know what remdesivir was, or they didn't ask, or, my family was separated. There's so many things that should be discussed.
Yeah, wow. So Dr. Artis is going to be in the second one that's upcoming, right? And so what was you mentioned, how many episodes are you planning on having total? Have you figured that out yet? Because you got down to like the fourth one. I was talking about the Great Reset, right?
Right now we're currently talking for, we met with somebody that talked to us about education, and we didn't put education in there. And so that might be something entirely separate, because that's also an important topic that needs to be exposed on. Where did our educational system come in? When did it come in? Who gets to say on who educates our children and curriculum and all that kind of stuff? And when did these changes happen? And what are we seeing? So again, go back to your questions earlier of what have we done as a society? And education is one of those big things that we've allowed in, whether we've known it or not.
Yeah, education's a tough nut to crack. I mean, because it's hard to find books that you want your kids to read, right? I mean, I have like a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and this is kind of getting out there. I mean, it's hard to like just throw this out, but there's some things in some of the science books that I'm like, I don't want my kids to read this, right? Like it doesn't really align with my worldview. And I mean, it's hard to find science books that are not like that don't have some element of propaganda in them, and children are so impressionable, right? Like they just take it as the truth. Their minds aren't developed enough to be able to like ask a question, right? Like, does this make sense? What's the evidence for it? What's the evidence against it? They're just at that age, they just memorize things. Like, if this is true, this is true, this is true,
Yeah. I just have to pass the test, so my parents are proud of me,
Yeah.
And so, I think that's.
Yeah, I didn't even, and you don't realize it. We went through this, right? Propaganda. The school, our schooling led us to understand the world in a certain way, right? Like you just have these deep-seated beliefs about the way the world works, and at its root, it's a world that doesn't have God in it, right? So for people who do believe in God and they want to pass that belief down to their children, mainstream schooling is very problematic, because it's built in as like a underlying kind of understanding. It's a materialistic understanding of the world. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with most of the science that's taught, I mean, so science is mechanistic, we're talking about how things work, but we're not, you have to link it to like, what's the root cause in reality, right? Like the root cause. I mean, so from my own perspective, I'm Muslim. We believe in cause and effect, but we believe that God creates the cause and He creates the effect, and He actually links them. I mean, they're not linked by themselves, right? They don't actually, things in the world don't have their own, power to do things, right? Power ultimately comes from God, and there's a way that He does things in reality, and you can learn about His way, right?
Right.
But that it's a fine distinction, right? I'm not saying that like atoms don't exist, or that if a pool ball hits another pool ball, it's not going to move the way that we describe it in a physics textbook. It will, right? Because that's the way God's designed it. But the distinction is just not there. So I went through that system myself, and by the time I got to college, I was like way off the path, right? And I came very close to becoming an atheist, right? And it was a close call for me, and then I kind of made my way back. But I can understand how people can become atheists, right? Just from their schooling and from their teachers, and from the people they hang out with, and from especially once you get to college.
Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. No. But what's fascinating is that when you talk about science and everything else, is what's really interesting is how quantum physics really is proving that, and unfortunately our science textbooks and everything else haven't really caught up to this, because they're really harping this whole thing that there's no God, there's no designer, there's no, there's nobody behind all of this. But the deeper we get into quantum physics, we find more and more that we really can't get away from the idea that there is omnipresence. Because like we talk about in the documentary, there was this little section that I brought in because I felt like it was appropriate, because it's talking about light and darkness. And we talk about quantum mechanics and how there's the QED, which is quantum electrodynamics, and how light is literally a part of every single atomic interaction, and it actually, light is what holds the universe together. And that there's so much beyond just what we can see as far as light goes, right? There's electromagnetic, there's radio waves and ultraviolet and all this stuff that we can't see. And these photons of light just appear out of nowhere every single time that there's an electron that needs energy, and all of a sudden that's what holds the universe together. Well, that means that light is literally omnipresent, which means that quantum mechanics has proven omnipresence. So it hasn't proven that there's a God, but the idea of omnipresence and the reality of omnipresence is literally in everything that we have. Every part of your cell, every part of mine, everything that in our voices, everything in the computer and the desk and everything. It's all there. Light is there and omnipresence is there. And so therefore, it's not inconceivable that there could be a being that is also omnipresent.
Yeah, what I've seen is that the very smartest people who are the very smartest atheists have started to realize that we can't really account for our existence through evolution. Right? Like it's just literally impossible. And so much has been written. I mean, books and books have been written about this, that like the idea that we have that like, oh, you can just have like a million monkeys typing out on a typewriter, a million typewriters, and you'll end up with like Shakespeare's, canon.
Right. They'll end up with Hamlet.
It's utterly impossible, and it's because there's so many different things that have to happen just so for us to get to where we are, evolutionarily, that it's just impossible, right? There aren't enough universes. Okay.
No.
And so what I've seen is the very smartest people have actually started to believe in little green men, just because that's the only way they can, we must have been created by some little green men. But then it's like, okay, why don't you take it another step? Who created the little green men?
Right.
You can't, I mean, it's not like the turtles all the way down thing. I mean, you have to have like, there has to be something at the bottom that the bottom turtle's standing on.
Right. Exactly.
So it's just
well, as a science lover, you might like a book that's called God Experiments. And I thought that was a great one. He actually was an atheist that set out to prove that God wasn't real. And as he was doing these different scientific studies, God used diamonds, he used all this stuff to share I am real. And so he actually talks about how where atheists a lot of times will try to use science to disprove that God is real. He, on that journey, ended up proving that he exists and that there was a divine creator throughout history. So, yeah.
I mean, if people are atheists, I would just encourage them to read some of the books. There are some great books out there that I mean, it's very difficult to, some of the arguments are easy to poke holes in, and some of the books that have been written from the other perspective, trying to prove that God doesn't exist, I mean, they've also been taken apart by believers, and I mean, it's so clear that the arguments in them are so flimsy, right? I mean, they sound good, right? Like they sound good if you read them. You're like, oh, that sounds great. That's a great argument. But if you really have somebody who really understands these things go through those arguments, they can easily show that they're extremely flimsy arguments.
It is. It's amazing to watch apologists at work when they just get in there and they just start going, well, what about this? And what about that? But you said this over here. That doesn't make sense when you compare this to what you said over here. And it's like, they just, you're just like, wow. It's really kind of fun to watch. There was the God Delusion, I think, or no, wait. It was the God Delusion. It was written by, what's his name? Oh gosh. I can't remember his name, but anyway, there was a little teeny tiny book, and that book is thick. There's a little teeny tiny book called The Deluded Atheist. I can't remember his name, but he wrote, it's like this little pamphlet, and he just destroys this guy's, 500, 600 page volume, and it's not that hard to destroy.
So this is so interesting. Tell me a little bit more about this next second episode. Who else did you talk to along with Dr. Artis?
So Karen Kingston is going to be in there, and if people don't know who Karen Kingston is, you can I don't know, you can't Google things and find out who they are because it's just not good. But Karen Kingston was a Pfizer employee. And so she actually says, this is how these work. This is the protocols. This is what you should be doing, all that kind of stuff. So and every time I listen to her and we hang out, my mind is just like, slow down. Wait a second. Let me catch up. And brilliant. And for all the different people that we've interviewed, people can go look up. We try to cite everything so they can research on their own, because we're not trying to tell anybody how to think. We're trying to get them to think for themselves. So I think that was one of the exciting things with the documentary is we're not imposing our thoughts on anyone. We're saying, hey, what about this? And that's interesting. And that's, so.
Well, and I was actually homeschooled all 12 years of, my educational
That's why
existence.
He's slightly smarter than me.
Whatever. No, but what I noticed though is like what you were talking about earlier with education. It's like we've been taught to compartmentalize things. It's like, well, we're going to talk about science for this 45 minutes, and then the bell's going to ring, and then we're going to stop, and then we're going to talk about history, and they don't have anything to do with each other. And that's just not the way that my mind works, because I never was part of that system. And so I see. So when it comes to like this second episode, like you mentioned, one of the things that it's like what I'm fascinated by was like Dr. Simone Gold. This is one of the pieces that's going to be in there. We talk about how she was talking she came from a Romanian heritage. Her dad actually escaped Romania. And she was talking about how her dad said that the communists would find mediocre people. Like literally, like they wanted medium grade people because they didn't want stupid people because they would just screw everything up. And they didn't want too smart of people because they'd figure it all out. But if they could find the mediocre people, right?
They'll use them.
And so this is, we're interviewing a doctor, and she's like giving us this gold. And I'm like, wow, this explains Pelosi and Fauci and like all of these, just like you're going like, these people are dumb. Like how did they get into these positions, But then it's like they're smart enough, to kind of navigate in that space. And so we have conversations like that. There's a really great, like Joy said, we have Dr. Naputi, we have Dr. Northrop, Dr. Artis, Mikovits is in there. But one of the things that we did, which was kind of fun, but it was really fascinating, was Tom Renz, when I was interviewing him, he said, you know what I love? He says, I love to just like have a beer and hang out with some friends around fire. I'm like, well, let's do that. So we got like 4 doctors and him around a bonfire, and they just talked for like 2 hours, and we filmed it.
And had we actually known about you at the time, you would have been one of them.
yeah. If we had known you, you would have been there. But it was really, really amazing conversation. And so like those are the types of things that we filmed. We filmed, Dr. Northrop a couple of times, all of them a couple of different times at different junctures on the tour. And then but like I said, we're trying to weave an entertaining narrative that kind of follows several of these people, but we're having conversations about how the medical tyranny is fed by the propaganda, and then there's these, they find mediocre people, and we bring William Federer in to talk about how tyranny has taken different shapes along the way, and so it's like it's all kind of woven together in something that makes, and we do it without narration because we want people to have the experience of feeling like they're waking up on their own, and they're just kind of traveling through this new universe and discovering these things. And then we want to make the goal is to make a 4-part kind of primer, right? So it's like you could just put this in front of somebody and they could go, oh my gosh, I feel like I have context now for all of the craziness that's been going on.
I think, and Dr. Northrop, one of the people on our team had gotten a vaccine. And so privately he goes over to Dr. Northrop and he's like, how do I get this out of my system? What do I do? And so she's like, great, let's do that on camera. Let's actually talk about that, because there's so many people that have been vaccinated and multi-vaccinated. And there's, pregnant women that have had infertility issues and different things. And so she goes into a lot of that kind of stuff. So it is, and we kind of just skim the surface. After people are introduced to these different people that are speaking out, they need to start doing their own research and finding out more about the topics that pertain to them that we try to, we try to expose in an hour and a half.
So there's somebody over here that's asking about wanting to know if you could share about remdesivir, because apparently they're needing some information.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that I wouldn't use remdesivir on myself or on any of my patients. And I think that, you can look up what Dr. Artis says about it. I mean, basically, I agree with him that it causes kidney failure. I mean, it may kill people who use it. I don't see how it has any efficacy or there's no reason to use it for COVID. So there's only downside with remdesivir. So it's like, it's worse than useless, which unfortunately is the case for vaccines and for a lot of things that we're using for this pandemic. Worse than useless. It's literally harmful. So certainly don't use it on anyone. I mean, it's not helpful for anyone at any age, no matter what, no matter how sick you are, or, it's really, there's really no good reason that I can see to use it anytime. And even the WHO didn't, recommend it in the beginning. I mean, there's like, it's like the company's own data, one of their trials showed that it might help a little bit, right? I mean, it's just like, it's not, it's hard for me to understand why the FDA would prove it until you look at the price tag, right? I mean, so there's a huge double standard. Yeah, I mean, there's just a tremendous double standard. I mean, they reviewed the data for fluvoxamine and for ivermectin, and they couldn't find any reason to recommend these extremely cheap but effective drugs, hydroxychloroquine, and yet they recommended remdesivir. So I have nothing good to say about that drug.
Dr. Artis, and I wish I could remember, but it's actually on the CDC's own website. Like it's deep, buried deep within the protocol recommendations. Like the number one, of course, is remdesivir, but then the second one is literally ivermectin, like right underneath remdesivir, and
which is so utterly ridiculous. Ivermectin is literally the safest drug on the planet. I can basically say that because I've probably prescribed it to more people than most doctors in the entire world. I mean, I would. It's safer than Tylenol, ibuprofen. Basically anything to get over the counter.
It's not a horse pill.
Yeah. That's just so silly, right? Like people, maybe they don't realize that amoxicillin and Augmentin are also horse medicines and fish medicines and cat medicines and dog medicines. We don't, go out searching for medicines that are specific to dogs and cats and horses. We basically reuse the stuff that we use on ourselves because they're mammals. I mean, they work basically the same way we do. So obviously there are horse versions of ivermectin, which we're not prescribing.
Right. Well, and then when you were talking about the vaccines, I think the thing that we need to start doing is stop calling them vaccines, because they're not really vaccines.
Well, they changed the terminology.
They're gene therapies. And that's one of the things that I'd asked Karen Kingston and Tom Renz, is that because they're so that's why they're trying to call them vaccines, because it falls underneath that blanket of liability that you mentioned. Right. But if that can actually be proven in a court of law, and they can actually push this through, their blanket of liability is gone, because they forced something that's not vaccines. Can you explain to everybody
the difference, what a vaccine was intended for, and how they were supposed to be this preventative type of a thing, so that people that don't know can catch up quicker than we can explain?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we should stop calling them vaccines, because, like you said, they are trying to use that terminology to protect themselves from liability. And if we remove that and don't allow them to use it, they literally change the definition in real time, right? Like as we were all watching, like they go to run to the dictionary and change the definition of vaccine, and they run to their websites and change the definition. And this is so dystopian, right? I mean, it's like literally what he was writing about, and what George Orwell was writing about in 1984, that you're going to go and change the definitions as events are taking place. You run and go and change the definitions. Yeah, so vaccines are supposed to prevent disease. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a vaccine. You take it beforehand so that you don't get sick when you're exposed to the infection or whatever it is. And now they're basically therapeutics. They're meant to lessen the harms of the disease, so they don't prevent you from getting it, and they're meant to decrease the severity of the illness. So that's basically a therapeutic that's given beforehand, to lessen how bad it is. And they don't even do that, unfortunately. I mean, that's the story that they're telling everyone. I mean, I just had an interview with Gert Vandenbosch, and he said that, right now there's kind of like this, we're in the eye of the storm, where it seems like everything's peaceful and it's limiting the severity, but it's actually setting people up for a much worse outcome later on. So as time goes by, these vaccines are going to push the development of the variants in the wrong direction. We're going to get a more virulent variant specifically for vaccinated people. Like he literally believes the variant will be like, trained specifically on vaccinated people's immune systems, and people who have not been vaccinated will not be harmed by it. Like it's literally only going to be specific to them, which is like, I mean, it's so horrible, right? I mean, it's horrifying that your immune system has been primed to take a fall, right? And I mean, maybe it took a year or 2 years to get to that point, but he's saying in the next few months we're going to see a variant spreading that is specifically targeting and putting people who have been vaccinated into the hospital, killing them, specifically targeting them. So yeah, I mean, these are not, and I have trouble stopping it, right? Not saying vaccine. I keep saying it myself. We've been programmed, right? And people don't realize that that you're programmed by what you watch, right? The media that you watch programs you to say things in a certain way.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and that's what we're talking about. It's like they misuse words all the time. I mean, actually, what's really interesting, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but not really, is that the term driver's license is literally a commercial term, and a lot of people don't know that. It's like you're not a driver unless you're actually taking something for commercially. If you're just traveling, you're just traveling. You're not and they can't license that, and so that's why they use the word driver, is so that they can license you underneath the Commerce Clause. And that's where they, and so, but if you're just traveling from point A to point B in property that you own.
See, now you sound like you're talking to Ann Vandersteel.
Right, I know. But anyway, but I was just, but it's interesting because they use terms, and they switch terms on us, and they program us to say those types to agree with them, to understand, to stand under what it is, their authority. And we need to realize, we need to get wise to their tricks, because it's like like the whole informed consent thing you brought up earlier just reminded me of something else, was that they actually did something. I think it was Obama actually signed an executive order that waived informed consent if the government thought it was better for you. Like if they thought better than you thought for yourself, like, that they could waive informed consent. Well, that's completely immoral and completely unconstitutional. But if people don't know about it, they can't stand up for it, because you can't claim a constitutional right that you don't stand up for.
Right.
And so we have to actually stand up, and that's why it's important for all of us to become awake, and it's important for all of us to attack them back,
or at least
because their system will crumble. Their system will crumble because it can't handle the righteous judicial weight that we could all put on it if we just start demanding those constitutional rights.
So just, I want to jump to that last episode about the Great Reset, because a lot of people don't know what the Great Reset is, or they think that it's just, a conspiracy theory or something, but it's actually something that's out in the open. I mean, it's not something that anyone's trying to hide or that anyone's making up. So just tell us a little bit about what that is and how it's affecting, or how it might affect us.
Yeah. So there's a gentleman named Klaus Schwab, for those that don't know, and he has wrote several books, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He's talked about the Great Reset, the Great Narrative.
Literally wrote a book called The Great Reset.
Yeah, that's the book. And so he is the head of the World Economic Forum. His right-hand man and advisor is Noah Yuval Harari, and he is a Jewish atheist. And so they talk about their plans and purposes for humanity across the globe. And so they're moving us to a globalist society, not because the globe is more connected because of technology, but because they have heinous intentions for humanity. And so there's an elite group. And then I can't remember, what is the young leaders that come out of the World Economic Forum?
I can't remember. I don't remember.
So if you can look it up, it'll be in the fourth episode. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you look up the people that have graduated from it, is Gavin Newsom, and we are originally from California. You have got Trudeau. You've got all of these people that are now in places of power. They're typically in this around the same age group. So if you see people that are waking up, they're the older generation. We're seeing people that are 40 plus years old. We're in that generation because of our parents, because of what happened over in Germany and everything. We're pretty close to that. And then that next generation, through education and everything and propaganda and all of these different things, are buying into this great reset, this great narrative that's being told out there. And it's something that this is what we want people to go and look into themselves. If you look up the World Economic Forum, you're talking about you being Muslim. They're using some of the Muslim nations, and they're destroying their ideology, and they're using it for their own devastating purposes. It's despicable what they're doing across our globe. And then they use these different words that we all agree upon. We agree upon inclusion. I want to include all people. I want to love people. I want to be kind. I want to do all this stuff. And so we're like, yeah, I want that. And that speaks to my heart. But they're doing it under the guise of very, very heinous things. And so you have to know what you're actually agreeing to. And so that's what we really want to expose in the fourth episode.
But what I find really encouraging, because I'm a hope guy, so I'm always looking for the something that's hopeful here, and there's just a lot to be unhopeful about right now. But I think the thing that really gives me a lot of hope is that these people are acting like they don't have much time left. I've never seen, literally, this is what I've thought, right? As I'm going, okay, so if there is a big, dark, dastardly plan that is going on, and it's been going on for multiple generations, all the way back from the Rockefellers and you want to go deeper into the Jesuits and the whatever. If this is a big plan, and that's been going on, and now, and it's like these people have a lot of money and a lot of power. A lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of influence. And you're going like, well,
this is our little man.
All right.
In the back. Okay, go out for a minute. On the back.
Okay, we will.
Go out for a minute. I'm almost done.
Okay.
and we do life this all the
time. They're homeschooled too.
sorry for the interruption. We do homeschool.
But anyway, but these people have a lot of money, a lot of power, and a lot of influence. But what's really fascinating is I'm like going, okay, wait, hold on a second. So like more people, like we were talking about earlier, are awake than ever before, all across the planet. You're seeing what's going on in France right now with the elections, and the Australians are waking up, the Canadians are waking up. I mean, the Canadians, for crying out loud, the Canadians never do anything. You know what I mean? And they're taking it to the streets, right?
Yeah.
And there's all of these people all over the world that are waking up, and you're going, okay, now if I had all the money and the power, you talk about thinking logically, if I had all the money and the power and influence, why wouldn't I just sink back down into the hole from whence I came and just kind of, reassert and reawait and, do it again in like 60 years or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, put people back to sleep. Why are you just doubling down? Like, these people are doubling down in some sort of weird way. And I'm like going, there's some sort of timeline, there's some sort of something that they're fighting against.
Yeah, I mean, I think what my guess is that they see that the economic order is about to explode, right? So we're at the end of this current fiat monetary system. The U.S. dollar is about to die, right? I mean, fiat monetary systems last for only so long, and this has gotten so long in the tooth that, I mean, all the signs are there. It's about to crumble, and out of it is going to be a new world order. And so people are going to be in like a world of hurt economically, right? I mean, people are going to lose all their savings. They're very soon going to see that the government can't fund Social Security and Medicare anymore, right? So all these, they're unfunded liabilities of the federal government. The government is bankrupt, and it's so far gone that the level of debt that we have is so large that it's growing out of, we can't catch it anymore. So it's taken off and it's entered orbit. And the problem is that our GDP can't grow fast enough to pay it off. And eventually it'll get so big, and it's already actually there, that they can't raise the interest rates. The Fed can't raise the interest rates because the government won't be able to pay even the interest on the debt if the interest rates go up. And so everything is coming to a head, right? So the entire society is about to just explode. And when that happens, people are going to realize that we've been lied to, and we're not going to get what we paid into this. We're not going to get anything back. And people, if the government or whoever doesn't have a really, really like vice-like grip on everyone, there will be literal revolution. Right there will be, the pitchforks are going to be going, coming for them, and that's what they see. They see that the pitchforks are about to come out, and they're about to come for us. And before that happens, we have to clamp down so hard. And so this is what worries me, that we saw what they were able to do with a virus that had like a 0.1% death rate. They were able to convince people to stay in their homes and lock them up and destroy the livelihoods of everyone except for the very rich, right? Except for the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world. All the, the middle class was destroyed. All these mom and pop restaurants and, all these mom and pop businesses destroyed, bankrupted. And they did that with a virus that was like almost nothing, right? I mean, it was nothing. They have viruses, right? There are viruses in labs that have 30% death rates, right? You got smallpox, you got anthrax, you got tularemia, you got plague. There are some really dangerous things out there. And so this is what I'm worried about, that, the next step is going to be something worse, I mean, they tried to get this control.
They're trying to depopulate society so that they can get out of some of these financial binds that they're in.
So I think depopulation has always been a goal. I mean, it's been there for 100 years, right? I mean, it goes back to, German times and, Nazi times and this ideology of, the Malthusian ideology that we don't, we can't carry this many people on Earth, right? Eventually we're going to, run out of resources, has been around for, since the 1800s. And the ideas persist. Bill Gates has the same idea. He's worried about that. He's worried that, we're going to have too many mouths to feed and we're not going to have enough to go around. And so we need to limit our use of energy and the use of all resources. And so, the reason he vaccinates is to depopulate. I mean, it's not, I mean, he doesn't come out and say that my vaccines are killing people or they're preventing people
from getting
pregnant. He's got this other, apparently the data shows that if you have healthier kids, you have fewer kids, something like that, right? But he's very open about it. That his main goal is depopulation. He doesn't want so many people around. So I think there is this idea at the highest levels of, the deep state and our government, people who are really in charge. A lot of them do believe that we need to limit population and depopulate, right? And very few people realize the disaster that's coming. I mean, you can't depopulate the world without completely destroying every economy, right? So
Right.
like every
Right.
economy will be in the, it's just there won't be an economy, right? As birth rates, and birth rates are already plummeting. So this has been part of the agenda, and it's been part of the, you know. This has been part of the programming, right, that we all grew up with. Just have fun and party and don't worry about responsibilities and getting married and having kids. That's no fun. And so unfortunately, I mean, we're already locked into a depopulation loop that I think is maybe impossible to escape, even without something literally killing people, right, or literally removing their ability to procreate. People have already been convinced not to procreate, right? Like you don't even need to get rid of their ability to do it. They've chosen not to do it, and so we don't have replacement levels of babies in most Western countries, right? So you go out a couple hundred years, and who's going to inherit the earth? It's going to be the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews,
Right.
The people who still want to have babies.
What's interesting, yeah, you're right, because it's like what's interesting is that I've looked through the Bible and I don't see I don't see God ever worried about overpopulation. Like he's always talking about be fruitful and multiply. Like that's his thing, right?
I think he's got a plan.
And I think he's got a plan, right? And so that's one thing, and then it's also really interesting too. And I've started thinking about this, and I don't have a lot of data to share on people, but it's kind of like one of these weird things I start thinking about is why do we trust their census numbers? Like we've found out that they're fraudulent and all these other things, and they would use census numbers and they would use population numbers to say like, oh, we're overpopulated, we need to cull the herd. Well, that just feeds into their fear. Well, how do we know? Because I've actually literally found I found an article from India that talked about how China was fudging their population numbers because they wanted to have some sort of superiority over India. And so it happens. And so I'm like going, it just feels like they could use that to manipulate people. So how do we know that there's actually 7 billion people on the planet? You know what I mean? I mean, we know for sure that 81 million people didn't vote for Joe Biden, so they're lying all over the place.
Yeah, but I think that the important point that you brought up is that I don't think we should be worried about what Malthus was worried about, that the Earth has a carrying capacity, and if you hit it, all of a sudden, we're not going to be able to carry more humans because of human ingenuity. I mean, we continue to, get new breakthroughs in crops and the ability to get. There's plenty of land and there's plenty of food to go around, and it's just people starve because of political reasons. They don't starve because there's not enough food in the world.
Right.
And we can't produce enough food.
Because of war. Yeah,
war, like what's happening in the Ukraine. The fertilizer prices have gone up, and a lot of farmers in a lot of places aren't going to plant this year, and then in the fall we're not going to be. A lot of places are going to be without food. It's not going to be the U.S. So I mean, people who are worried and going out and buying canned food and stuff here, it's not us that's going to be suffering. It's going to be the poorer countries, on the margins, who are not going to be able to afford food or get enough food. The rich countries are going to be okay, and it's going to be the people that we say that we care about. There's the people in Africa who are going to be suffering and not able to pay for the food prices when they go up.
Oh God, Africa! Like my heart goes out for Africa. Good Lord.
I'm just waiting for God to do something big that's going to come out of Africa, and I just feel like that unfortunately, I mean, if you just look at what the Gates Foundation has done over there with their studies and research and everything, I just keep thinking that God is a just God, and eventually they're going to be a very blessed country and not a third world country, and
continent.
I just think that something's going to happen in the future.
I mean, they're resource rich. I mean, they have tremendous resources. So certainly there's, I don't know. I mean, not a lot of people are into Bitcoin, but if Bitcoin becomes what people think that it will become, some of these underdog countries are going to be quite rich. The
Yeah.
ones there's a Central African Republic that just went on a Bitcoin standard, or just made Bitcoin legal tender, along with some South American countries.
Is that the second one?
They've legalized Bitcoin in a some Central African country that no one's ever heard of, but the president of that country is like a math PhD or something. He's tweeting about like math papers and Bitcoin and stuff. So that's a whole nother topic. It's very interesting.
We'll just keep coming back and we'll hang out with you and it'll be great.
Yeah. No, this was really interesting. I mean, there are a lot of threads here that I would love to, grab a hold of and go down a lot of different paths that we could talk about. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I know we've gone over quite a bit now.
Our pleasure. This was wonderful.
This was a lot of fun.
We look forward to getting to know you more and hanging out in person one of these days.
Yeah, hopefully we'll meet at one of these tours. But
yeah. Are you going to be in South Carolina?
No, I'm probably going to be in Virginia. So if you guys show up to that one, the Virginia Beach one.
Yeah, our plan is to be there as well.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.